We're going to be in Exodus 2, starting in verse 11. Exodus chapter 2, starting in verse 11. Chapter 2 and verse 11. We're going to start talking about Moses as a grown-up. Last week we talked about Moses as a little child. He wasn't making his own decisions. Other people were making decisions for him. So his mom and dad hid him. That was decision number one. Then they put him in a little boat and put him out in the river. That was decision number two. Pharaoh's daughter shows up, makes decision number three, and takes him in to be her own child. I guess decision number four was probably Miriam's, to go get a nurse for him, and goes and hires her own mom to be the nurse. So all of those things were decisions that were made for Moses as he was too young to make his own decisions. Then Moses grows up, and when Moses is old enough to make his own decisions, he makes some very heartfelt but dangerous decisions, and that's where we are in verse 11. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were, and he watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" But the man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. So Moses is going to see his own people. And that's a very important phrase. Even as a man who had grown up going to school as an Egyptian, a man who had grown up in the courts of the Egyptians, and I'm going to guess looked like an Egyptian. Remember we talked a little bit about Joseph and the way they wore their hair or didn't wear their hair and how much they shaved and the little goatee thing. And they were very different looking than the Hebrews. He would have been a man who wasn't usually around flocks and herds because the Egyptians would not have had dinner with him if he did. You didn't hang out with shepherds if you were a noble Egyptian. So Moses goes, but he wants to go see his own people. So he has an identity other than just being Egyptian. And when he goes out to see his own people, he sees an Egyptian beating one of his own people. So I love the way the NIV translates this. We get that phrase twice in a short paragraph. He went out to see his own people, and he saw an Egyptian beating one of his own people. Excuse me. So I want us let's read a couple more verses. Then I want us to run over to Hebrews and read what the Hebrew writer says about this episode. Verse 15, when Pharaoh heard about it, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. All right, so we'll go ahead and move Moses to Midian. But look at Hebrews chapter 11, and we'll start in verse 24. So again, when I say Hebrews 11, what are we talking about? Faith. That's the faith chapter. It's the roll call of the faithful. You've got all kinds of folks, beginning with Abel and going all the way down. You even get mention of some of the prophets, Isaiah and some of those guys. But in chapter 11 and verse 24, we have a short snippet about Moses. By the way, we've already met Moses in Hebrews. The overall theme of the book of Hebrews is Jesus is better. And so he goes through piece by piece and he says, well, this was really cool what God did with the angels. Jesus is better. This is really neat what God did through Moses, but Jesus is better. Here's what God did with the high priest. Jesus is better. Here's what God did with the sacrifices on the Day of Atonement. Jesus is better. So he works his way all the way through it. But then when he gets to 11, his main purpose with the chapter is to show all of these great people who live by faith and that we as Christians have it even better than they did because Jesus is better. So 11 and 24. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw the one who is invisible. Now that's kind of an interesting take on what we just read in Exodus, yes? Why did Moses leave according to the Exodus account? And by the way, Moses wrote this down. Pharaoh wanted to kill him. Right? The Hebrew writer says, well, he wasn't afraid. He just left because it was a faith matter. Right? It's not time for Moses to die. It wasn't time for Moses to die when he was put in the bulrushes. It's not time for Moses to die now. But the Hebrew writer will always interpret the Old Testament scriptures in a favorable fashion. The heroes of the Old Testament will never be shown by the Hebrew writer to be villains or bad guys. They're always walking the straight and narrow, and they've always got a clean slate, and they always know that in the end things are going to be better. Now, I'm not sure on this particular day when Moses killed the Egyptian and when Moses found out that Pharaoh wanted to kill him and he left for Midian, I'm not sure that Moses had that all packaged up as well as the Hebrew writer has it packaged up. Hebrew writer is looking back through history to see where Moses ended up. But on that day, at that particular time, it was time for Moses to get out of Egypt. And so Moses left and went to Midian. Best thing that Moses ever did. Really was a fantastic decision on Moses' part. The reason that he went to Midian itself is mysterious. It's not the Riviera. It's, if you were just going to go lay low someplace, it's not the place you would choose. It's a very arid region. It's where Mount Sinai is. So we're talking about a place that is rugged and very remote, a place where people do flocks. So it's not the kind of thing that would be a real step up in Moses' life. But he leaves Egypt and he moves to Midian. And of course, as we saw, he sits down beside a well. There was a priest in Midian who had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. This raises all kinds of fun questions. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? Whose priest is he? Right? We run into these guys occasionally, like you remember Melchizedek? Abraham just runs into this guy near Jerusalem, and he is a priest of the Most High God. Well, how did he get to be a priest of the Most High God if he's not even connected to Abraham and his family? Right? God's got Abraham. He's building his family to be the chosen people, and then all of a sudden we run into this guy who doesn't have anything to do with Abraham. They just happen to be in the same place at the same time, obviously by God's design, but who is he? Where did he come from? Get over to Hebrews, read a little bit more about Melchizedek. The Hebrew writer will tell you all about the guy. He was one without beginning and without end. That's the way the Hebrew writer describes him. We don't know where it came from. We don't know how he got to be the priest of the Most High God. Well, who is this priest of Midian? We know a little bit about him. We know he had 7 daughters. We know that they were shepherds and that his daughters were shepherdesses. They were out taking care of the flocks. We know that they went probably every day to the same place to water the flocks. There was a community well or set of wells. And we know that probably every day they were pushed to the side by other shepherds. Guessing, although we're not told, that the other shepherds were not female. Guessing that they weren't very high on the pecking order because they're female shepherdesses, not male shepherds. So when the other flocks come in, they have guys with them. The guys just kind of shuffle the girls off to the side and want to water their flocks first. Moses steps up and makes sure that everything gets done for these girls that he's never met. So we've got 2 things in a row about Moses that ought to make us like the guy as an adult, right? When he wasn't making his own decisions, we applauded what happened to him because we wanted him to live, because we kind of know the end of the story. But when Moses grows up, first thing we know about him is he's very patriotic. He wants the Hebrews to do well. He is a moral man. He doesn't want to see one of them beaten, so he intervenes and he kills the enemy. He kills the Egyptian. When he gets to Midian, the first thing we see him doing is intervening on behalf of some people that are being oppressed. I mean, this is a good guy. I mean, he really has a heart that you want in somebody that is going to be a leader of God's people. What we find out later about Moses is that he's not doing these things because he's a great champion and a kind of a David, a big warrior hero. He's a very meek man. He just has a heart for people that are being oppressed. And he wants to do what's right. And when God gives him the opportunity to do the big thing, he's not really sure he wants to do it. But when he's just in the situation, in the spur of the moment, when it's time, his heart chooses the right thing. So I don't know about you, but as Moses has grown up, we like him. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" And they answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." So the daddy's not expecting them back so soon. This evidently happens every day. They go, the guys come run them off. They have to wait till everybody else is finished, and they get to be the last ones at the watering hole. "Where is he?" Reuel asked the daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man, who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." Now, this is a whole lot like NCIS. I tell you, I love NCIS. You watch a whole show, right? It lasts there's about 40, 45 minutes worth of action. And in the last 3 minutes, they figure everything out and everything, they tie it up with a bow. There was a lot longer going on here than that little paragraph. He goes to the house. He says, "Why don't you come in and have a meal?" Then he gives him a daughter. Then he has grands. Everything moves along really quickly here. I've become a foreigner in a foreign land. Well, during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Okay, so we have a period of time, which, by the way, is going to end up being about 40 years. You can take Moses' life. He lived 120 years, and you can chop him up into 340s. You got 40 years learning in Egypt, 40 years wandering around in Midian being a shepherd, and then 40 years leading the tribes of Israel out of Egypt over toward the border of Canaan. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the priest, his father-in-law. He's described as a priest of Midian, although we're never told what god he is the priest for. The name Reuel means friend of God, and the God there is like the Hebrew word El, which is kind of a generic, so that doesn't really tell us all we want to know. There are a lot of times in Genesis that the El is used to describe the God that we're talking about. But there are other names when you run into, like the covenant name, Yahweh. We haven't got to the covenant yet, so we wouldn't necessarily see that name, although it shows up in Genesis a few times. So as Moses is getting to know the area of Midian, God is getting to know about the problems that are going on in Egypt, and then they're going to all come together in chapter 3. But this friend of God, Reuel, who's also known as Jethro, and the name Jethro means abundance. And then there's one more name that is either attributed to him or to his dad, and I'll let you help me figure that out. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 10. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. If you get caught in Trivial Pursuit, Deuteronomy means the second law. Deutero means two. Nomos means law, Deuteronomy. You'll really look smart if you know that. Chapter 10, verse 29. Oh, good grief. Deuteronomy 10 doesn't have 29 verses. I wrote it down wrong. What did I do wrong? Well, try 19. Has it got a 19? Does 19 look like it has anything to do with Hobab? No, that's not it either. Well, give me one more second, and then I'll give up looking silly and just move on. Nope, didn't find it. Okay, the other name that he's given it, it's either him or his daddy, is named Hobab. Hobab. So some commentaries say that you've got three names for him, either Jethro, Ruel, or Hobab. And some say, well, it's Jethro and Ruel, and maybe his dad was Hobab. The reason that that's interesting at all is that Hobab is also referred to as a priest of God. That's, to me, that you have more than one, that maybe Jethro's dad was a priest, and he inherited the role of priest from his dad, that there was a group of them that were serving. Later on, you get to, let's see, Exodus 18. Run over there. I'm pretty sure I wrote that one down right. Exodus 18:7. Yes, we have a winner. Exodus 18:7. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down and kissed him. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way, how the Lord had saved them. Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians. He said, "Praise be to the Lord, who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly." Okay? Now, all through that passage, you have the capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D reference. Okay? That's Yahweh. That's the covenant name that we eventually learn when God tells Moses, he says, "Who shall I say sent me?" Well, tell them that the I am sent you. Tell them Yahweh sent you. Okay? So that's the covenant name that God gives. But Jews would never write that down. They write a euphemism for it. And it translates over for us as capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. So when you see that in print, you know that that's that special covenant name that's being used in that passage. Now, Jethro, Ruel, Hobab, uses this name. And he says, "Blessed be the Lord. Blessed be the one who has done all these things." And you say, well, obviously then, Jethro knows the Lord. He knows Yahweh. Well, you get farther down, he says, "Now I realize that the Lord is greater than all the other gods." So did he not realize that before? Was he not a priest of the Lord in the first place? Or did he just now learn that the Lord is the great God? And again, I can't answer that question. I don't know at what point Jethro really understands who the Lord is. I do know this about Jethro. Jethro is somebody who is going to be one of the formative people in Moses' life. When you think about folks who helped Moses become who Moses was, right? You start out with his mom and dad. We don't know how much interaction he had with Amram, but as Jochebed was his nurse, she at least had the time to talk to him several times a day during his infancy and up to the time he was maybe 3 to 5 years old. Then he moves on to the daughter of Pharaoh, who gets him schooled, makes sure that he's cared for physically, emotionally, scholastically. He grows up under her care. So she's an important person, although we don't know a whole lot about her. Then he moves to Midian, and when he moves to Midian, this guy Jethro shows up. And he gives him a daughter for his wife, and he is not just Moses' father-in-law. He becomes a confidant to Moses. He becomes someone that Moses trusts. So every time Jethro shows up in Scripture, things are good for Moses. He's somebody that has Moses' best interest at heart, and somebody that makes sure that even when he sees something maybe a little off in the way Moses is handling things, we'll talk about it later, but Moses just takes way too much responsibility on himself at one point. And he tells his father-in-law about it. And his father-in-law says, look, let's come up with a better plan. You're going to burn out doing all this stuff. Let me help you figure out how to govern the people of Israel. So part of the governing of Israel was straight theology. God said so. Moses told the people that's the way it was. And part of it was Jethro saying, you know, Moses, if you would approach it this way, then you wouldn't, be completely burned out in the next month or two and still have a long way to go before you get to Canaan. So this Jethro is an extremely important person. As far as his wife Zipporah, they had their ups and downs. There are times that Zipporah is a great wife, great encourager of Moses, and times that she just is infuriated with him, mainly because he's God's man. Right? God has Moses do some things that just blows Zipporah's mind, and she's not sure whether she married well at that point. But she has him for close to 40 years before God gets hold of him. Right? So she has plenty of time to get used to being a wife and mother and being just Moses and her, and then God comes on the scene, kind of changes the way that that Moses views the world and his role in it. And so sometimes his wife is on board with that, and sometimes not so much. So all these people that surround Moses. Who else? We shouldn't overlook Aaron, older brother, Miriam, older sister. They end up being great influences. Sometimes they're really, really helpful. Sometimes they're really, really a problem. Kind of like brothers and sisters. The things go really well with them sometimes, and they're a lot of help, and sometimes they have problems inside the family. But anyway, we'll put a bookmark in it right there because we want to talk about God's first big interview with Moses. He's 80 years old by the time God finally comes to him on the mountain. He has a lot of ideas about who he is, and God's going to just change all of that stuff in one interview. So Lord willing, we'll talk about that next week. If there's something we can do tonight to encourage you, we would sure love to do that as we sing.